Commission on the Future of Public Education. We're a nice small group. We're sort of situated around this table, but we'll mingle. And we may be small enough that we just have our conversations kind of live. Depending on the size of the group, we break up onto tables. So if we get too many more people, we are happy to do that. But otherwise, this is a nice conversational group. So this is what we're hoping to do. This is sort of the third of our introductory input sessions. So we want to provide some information about the purpose of the commission and kind of how we've approached our work. What have we been asked to do and how are we breaking that up and trying to do that work? We'll give an overview of what the law asks us to do and talk a little bit about our context in Vermont related to public education and funding. And then really we hope to spend most of our time talking with you and hearing from you. We'll break that up into pieces. But before I jump into this, I'll let you know who's here. We'll have the commission introduce themselves. I'm Megan Roy. I'm the chair of the commission. I am here on the commission as a past member of the Act 173 advisory group. I am currently teach at St. Michael's College in the school leadership program, and I'm a former superintendent and special ed administrator and special educator.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jennifer Dex-Samuelson, the chair of the State Board of Education.
Hi, Oliver Olson. I'm the appointee of the Vermont Independent Schools.
Peter Conlon, member from the House on the commission, and nice to see many of my former school board colleagues here.
Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association.
I'm Elizabeth Jennings. I am the current Director of Finance and Operations for Addison Northwest School District in Verdun. And I'm the advising member of our Vermont Association of School Business Officials.
Good evening, everybody. I'm John Castle. I'm the Executive Director for the Vermont Rural Education Collaborative.
Hi, I'm Mike Licklider. I'm the Superintendent of the Harwood Unified Union School District, and I'm the representative of the Vermont Superintendents Association.
Hi, I'm Nicole Mace. I'm a school board member from Winooski, and I'm the appointee of the Vermont School Boards Association.
Hello, I'm Jeff Fannin, the Executive Director of Vermont NEA, and I'm the appointee of Vermont NEA.
Thanks. We do have a couple members who weren't able to join us. Craig Bolio is our tax commissioner. Zoe Saunders is our Secretary of Ed. And I think that's all of us. Oh, sorry. Ann Cummings is our representative from the Senate.
She's here.
And she might be on the screen.
I'm here.
I don't currently.
I hear her.
We're sharing slides, Ann, but you can introduce yourself. I can't actually see who's on the screen.
Okay. It says my camera is on, so you should be able to see me. I'm Ann Cummings, and I chair the Senate Finance Committee, and I represent the Vermont Senate.
Thanks, Ann. Okay, so apologies for the sort of scatteredness. We ended our official meeting a little later than we thought, so we took a minute to put our slides up. But again, this is meant to be pretty informal and to give you some information, and really it's just meant to have a conversation with you all. So I get to share the duties of the commission. These slides are typically available on our website. They'll also be sent out. We also have community access television here today, so this will be televised and more public. So if folks want to take a look at it. This is what we are charged to do. So I'm going to read it because it's a complex charge. So the commission is charged with studying the provision of education in Vermont and making recommendations for a statewide vision for Vermont's public education system to ensure that all students are afforded substantially equal educational opportunities in an efficient, sustainable, and stable education system. That's a pretty big charge. So this is who we are. We already introduced ourselves. These are our duties outlined in the law. We need to hold at least 14 public meetings. I believe this is July, August, September, October, November, December. This is our 6th. We need to rotate at least one meeting in each county in Vermont. So we began that rotation in, our first two meetings were held in Montpelier. And then we have started rotating. We'll continue to rotate in counties around the state. Those of us are here as volunteers. We receive compensation for mileage, but most of the folks here are here because this is a really important topic and are happy to represent the groups that they represent. We need to submit final recommendations around October 1st of next year for public input. That has to be a minimum of a 30-day public comment period. This public comment that this law references is a little bit more formal. It's a little bit like rulemaking, and all feedback from that process has to be included in our final report. We have chosen to organize our work in three policy areas. The law actually requires that we make policy recommendations in a number of areas. They all circle around these three things. And we'll talk in a second about how these three things intersect and make this issue really complex in Vermont. But we need to make policy recommendations about our education finance system. We need to make recommendations around education governance, resources, and administration. That has to do with the structure of the Agency of Education, the structure of the State Board of Education, sort of the role, function, decisions of local control versus state control. We'll talk about that a little later tonight. We also are charged with making recommendations about the physical size and footprint of the education system. That's how we deliver education in Vermont. So these are all things that the legislature has asked us to make recommendations about. We had our first meeting on July 15th of this summer. We had to submit a work plan and a communication plan by September 15th. All of that information can be found on our website through the Agency of Ed. Our biggest focus for the past few months and in today's meeting, and we have an additional meeting in December, is to generate a preliminary findings and recommendations report, which includes short-term cost containment recommendations. That's part of our responsibility, and we need to provide that by December 15th. We're going to be a few days past that, since the 15th is a Sunday. But most of our energy has been on that part of our charge. We write a final report by December 1st, 2025. And that will include that formal public comment period. That report also should coincide with potential legislative language by December 15th. Those two deadlines are pretty close together, but that's our long-term goal. And this commission does not exist anymore after December 31st, 2025. This is a really complex task with a lot of different things for us to think about. And so because of that, the commission wanted to agree on a set of guiding principles that would act as our guideposts for making our decision, the lenses that we consider any recommendation. We've agreed to use these principles. The first one is not a principle so much as an acknowledgement. In Vermont, by Constitution, the state is responsible for public education. The state chooses to do that work in our current system by delegating a lot of that authority to local school boards. And there's a tension between the state responsibility and authority in our Constitution and Vermont's tradition of local decision-making. That makes these conversations really complex. And so we acknowledge that. The next three are the guiding principles. We are committed to decision-making that centers equity for Vermont students. And we are committed to the following core understandings of equity. Equity is a really complex term. We could spend a lot of time defining it, but we agree on these three core understandings. The first one is that equity does not mean equal. The second is that solutions with an equity focus have to be differentiated by need. And equity needs to be considered both in terms of inputs, so what students have access to, as well as outputs, or what outcomes are our students getting as a result of what we provide. We have a guiding principle of quality. We want to make sure that all publicly funded Vermont students are afforded high-quality educational opportunities that are equitable, inclusive, anti-racist, culturally responsive, and anti-discriminatory. That language comes directly out of Vermont State Board rule. And our third guiding principle is sustainability and affordability. We know that public education needs to be affordable for Vermonters. You do not need to try to read this chart. This is a copy of our work plan framework, which really just describes how we've organized our work. The three areas to the right I talked about already. That's our delivery system, our governance, and our finance system. We also have a specific focus on communication and engagement. We are only 13 people. And as representative as the General Assembly tried to be in selecting this committee, we can't possibly represent all of Vermont. And so part of our core mission is to engage. We will be hiring a consultant to help us with this, someone with expertise in equitable community engagement, so that we can have more conversations like this and have conversations that are more accessible. We have 3 subcommittees. We have a steering group that's outlined in the law. 2 of those members are appointed by the administration, 2 are appointed by the Senate, and 2 are appointed by the House of Representatives. I'm sort of a de facto member as the chair. We have a subcommittee on communication and engagement, and that is because that's a really important part of our work. And then we have a subcommittee that is defined by the steering group to look specifically at education finance. That's the one subcommittee that has an outside member, a non-commissioned appointee, and that's Emily Cornhuss. I promise we won't talk at you all evening. These are our hopes with communication. We want to share information. We want to make sure that we listen and gather input from all of you. And we want to engage, meaning back and forth communication, so that we really are influenced by the engagement and what we talk to others about. Okay, so now we're going to pause. And since, I'm going to propose that we start just right now. We're a small enough group that it feels like an unmanageable conversation. We can break into groups. But we'd love to hear from folks just about some of the strengths of public education in Vermont. Another way to say this might be, what are the things you want to make sure that we preserve? Yeah.
We moved from Virginia, which is historically underfunded its education and has very severely limited educational outcomes. We didn't live in Northern Virginia, we lived in rural Virginia. So coming to a rural state where education is actually supported, and where I felt like my children were getting an education, a real education, versus a lot of political pandering and a whole lot of fluff. And it was nice to see the fact that education, in terms of the basics and science that's based on inquiry and all those sorts of things, were part of that. They were kind of baked into the Vermont system, and it was less subject to the political footballs that we kept seeing in Virginia. So I hope we can not make this a political process and look at rational decisions that we make around these things. And I hope that, as several commission members have said, that the focus in this whole process is around the students that are involved, not necessarily the dollars, because some of these questions are coming up that are saying these questions of size and these questions of distribution of resources, they're impacting the education of our students. So I hope that the commission is focused primarily on the impact of students.
I guess one of the intangible outcomes, like you're mentioning, is my kids love going to school in this district, and so like, what's the magical equation? I don't know. I can't tell you. All I can tell you is I have 2 boys in the high school right now, and in the elementary school, they loved going to school and did not want to miss a day. If we needed to take a day, they would get upset. And so I would credit 99% of that to the teachers. so the people that we have in our employment in our district in particular, but I imagine that's a statewide, so just making sure that we have high quality educators who love what they do, because I think the kids know that. They can tell when somebody's loving their job and maybe when they're not loving their job as much. And so my goal as a parent is always to support the teachers and to support the school system as much as I can. And I feel like if the state shows that support, whether that is, financially, and obviously there's, constraints, and we need to make sure that we're doing this in a way that we can pay for it. I would say that my elementary school experience was smaller class sizes, and that was a luxury. I know that it was, my kids' sizes were more like the mid-teens. And there was some flexibility where they could kind of move those kids around with different classrooms as needed. And so smaller class sizes help, but I know that when it gets too small, I feel like that can also be difficult especially with peer relationships. And we even saw that with the smaller 15 or so size classes.
Yes.
You mentioned the tension between the state needs and expectations and local control, which has been going on forever. There's also a tension between the sort of overall district expectations and individual teacher latitude. And I kind of want to build on the gentleman's comments from Virginia. In one of the state board of education rules, I think I'm getting the language right, it talks about wanting to foster critical thinking and make sure that that's implicit in all teaching. And that really takes a lot of time. That can't be put in an umbrella expectation and have people carry that forward. It requires a lot of teacher thought, planning, time with a small group of students. That's sort of building on what this lady said. And I just wonder how that, and I'm not even factoring in the cost when I'm talking about this. And I just wonder how the critical thinking and the teacher latitude, where they feel that they have enough opportunity to really dig into their job and the community in front of them, how that's going to play out as these tensions grow.
Hand over here. Okay.
But I wanted to tag in the inclusivity and social emotional learning needs that are created in schools with even, the school becomes a community. And I live in a tuition district. Our district educates 75 kids. But this is my third student is here at Middlebury. And once he crosses the threshold of the building, nobody in the school treats him as an outsider of the district. He's fully ensconced in the community of educators, in the community of the school. And I don't know really how to put in words how important that is and has been to all of my kids. And I must say, we do have a real fear of that being disrupted for him. And, just that once he's here, he's here.
Again.
Okay,
Thank you. I will remember that there's folks on the screen. Go ahead.
trying to think, I've been in teaching, I actually started in 1987, so it's quite a long time ago. When I entered, there was a lot of autonomy and a lot of, general guidance, but not a lot of really specific. And I'm still involved substituting a lot in Beresford Elementary School. And what the biggest thing I've seen is having too much prepared lesson plans, this and that and everything. So even though I don't know if this really says why our system is good, but I think that's something we have to watch, that we don't start buying into the fact that, oh, this program that I just found, oh, this is perfect. I was lucky enough to start off when a lot of science was done in elementary school, very hands-on, and we explored everything. I'm not seeing that anymore. So I'm really kind of frightened that students see just that screen and worksheets or something, you know, that kind of thing. So I would hope that as we look at this, that we take that into consideration. I also think that some of the programs tend to be quite pricey. And especially when a district adopts, say, a new reading program or something, that buying all the materials and doing all the training for this program is very expensive. And so again, just sort of the caution of looking carefully at what we're doing now or what we did 10 years ago, whatever we want to look at, and not keep thinking there's something better out there. Stop sort of, and we keep not giving programs enough time to prove whether they're really working or not. We go, oh, that's not working. Oh, this one over here is going to work better. And I think that would also be a cost-saving kind of thing.
Thank you. I'm gonna go pop up on the screen. We're sort of merging our meeting today. So folks on the screen, I'm just gonna make it so that you can see them. All right, I think you're listed as Jay-Z.
Hi, I'm Jim Ziegler. And I just wanted to say what's working are the small rural schools and, transportation, somehow managing to get kids to and from those small rural schools, the community schools, the local community schools. That I think that's a big thing about what's working in Vermont. I want to also second what someone said earlier, that having come from Connecticut a few years ago and Massachusetts before that and New York before that, this is the first time in my life that I've ever seen kids so excited to go to school and not miss a day, never want to miss a day, not for any reason. So I think that's some of what's working, and I also credit that to the teachers, and certainly the administrative staff helps. But yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just jotted down 3 things quickly. One, our very dedicated staff that are navigating a lot of challenges to make the wheels in this turn. Communities that care, kind of all over, communities that care in a lot of different ways. And then the ability to leverage different learning environments and really kind of build spaces around kids that help them meet their needs where they're at. And, if it's outdoors, indoors, and just really leveraging the spaces that are around and knowing that they're not all the same.
Yeah.
As I read the news and some of the politics that enters into education, as Steve started off talking about, Virginia or the politics, and it strikes me that, Vermont, at least so far, we have escaped the whole label of being one party or another when you run for a school board. All of us know how difficult it is to recruit good people to be running, but we have escaped that so far. And I would hope that we never enter that, although I'm very worried about it. And having been a school board member for a long time, that's not the way we work. And it's not the way you guys will work, but it is a trap. And if we enter that trap, either through direction or allowing us to become that, I think that's a very difficult place to get out of, honestly.
Yep, in the back.
Just today, for the first time, I looked at the curriculum and content areas section of the educational standards that are coming in 2025. And I saw something that caught my attention. There are 2 areas added. One is about teaching kids about ethics and teaching kids about other ethnic groups. That would never happen in so many other states. So talking about strengths in Vermont, I think that the breadth and the richness of what our state standards are. Okay, it's up to each district how to do it and, pursue it to the process of instruction, helping kids grow. But I think we've got a great solid anchor there, I think, with what looks like it's coming out in 2025.
Sorry.
You have to tell me not to talk. I also noticed, and I think you alluded to it earlier, that the decisions for educational quality should be data-driven. And while I understand what that means, I'm in a macro sense, I'm wondering if you all could be quite public about what data you're using and the choices behind that data. You know, since COVID, I know that the student general testing in the spring or the fall or whatever could be considered data, and I think that's fraught. And it would be really helpful for the public to understand the thought process behind what data you're using.
Thank you. I would just say, related to that question, we spent quite a bit of time even in today's meeting talking about data. And our early report will at least start with a list of all the different types of data that we have identified as being important to the conversation. And we also recognize that that's not all of the data, but it is the data that we've talked about so far, some of which we've been able to gather with a lot of support from others and some of which we don't have yet. And we also kind of recognize that it's an ongoing conversation and as we explore an idea, it will likely cause us to say, oh, what other information do we need? So that's helpful and hopefully our report will explain that a little bit. For those that have joined, because I know people have kind of come in, we're just right now, the prompt is just, what do you value about education in Vermont? And so that's what, you can probably sense that based on what people are saying, but that's what we're talking about right now.
I wanted to say something about the education finance system, which maybe isn't the first thing people think of. And, you know, if you have a slide coming that's asking us about the challenges, maybe that's where people would put that. But I just wanted to emphasize and sort of not lose sight of the fact that our model has equity built in at that fundamental level of how it's funded. And just even if this is something I was very interested in and kind of boiling it down to its essence. It really is designed, you know, if everything is working well, to have districts contribute an amount that's basically at its core about their ability to pay, not about and still have the opportunity to have a quality education in their community, a quality, you know, schools in their community. And that's really different from other states. And we know that, you know, there are other aspects of it. Like I said, you know, if we want to talk about the challenges, there are challenges. And they really come up on the tax side and the property tax side, I should say. But I don't want to lose the fact that, or lose sight of the fact that at its core, what we are trying to do is really an important way to think about what it means to say that people have a right to a quality education. So.
It's a good segue.
Yeah.
I can run this slide.
Thank you. If you just pop the tab back to the slides, I should be able to click it from here. And I get to turn it over to other people so you don't have to listen to me talk anymore. There you go. It has a funny. All right. I always forget which two colleagues has this.
I think it's.
That's Jeff.
Yeah. So the current context is, we've talked a little bit about it, but unlike any other state that I'm aware of, or truly most any other state, we're governed in some way or guided by Vermont's Supreme Court decision, Brigham v. State v. Brigham from 1997, that said it's a state responsibility to fund education. So with that, the legislature enacted Act 60. Then in 2004 or 5, Act 68. And you can't delegate to the towns that responsibility. So we have locally made decisions about how to spend money that are guided and influenced by decisions in Montpelier or DC or locally. But then we raise the money statewide through a statewide system. It's a mixed system of property tax and income tax. but it's an obligation of the state to make sure that no matter where you live and you're educating your kids, it's not based on your zip code. And so that's why we have the system we do that currently funds the system that we're working with. So to your point about equity and funding, that's hitting the nail on the head. So great segue. That's what we have. And could we improve upon it? Perhaps. And one of the things we want to hear from you all is maybe a little bit about that. And so love to hear more. What are some of the challenges we have in the current delivery system, right? How we deliver education. And do you have any thoughts and ideas about how to address those? So we really want to hear from you. This is perhaps a little bit, I feel, cordoned off in behind this table, two tables between us, but we genuinely want to hear from you. And we've been to Orange County, Franklin County, and here we are in Addison County. So we want to hear from everybody around the state as much as possible. So thanks for coming, and give us your thoughts, your best, your worst, your notions.
Go for it. You're good at breaking the ice.
I want to reiterate what this lady said about how education has changed over time in terms of delivery, and the tension in the classroom with the teacher time and training between the curricular expectations and the training up of the teachers, either through school training or by their own study, to deliver that in an effective way to the population in front of them. And the tension between those needs, which is significant time, and the how should I say this, the easy fix of getting a packaged curriculum, which is, as this lady pointed out, problematic from a lot of perspectives, and then expensive. Problematic because it oversimplifies, problematic because it can take away the teacher and school responsibility to train the teachers to think critically so that they can teach their students to think critically. All of that factors into resources and time and energy and training. And I think those are some of the challenges of our delivery system. What ideas do I have to address those would be, a whole different design of a school day, and maybe a longer school day, and maybe more teacher training time so that when they come out of their teacher training program, they have more supports in the beginning.
I think one of the challenges, again, speaking as a school board member, is that what you said relative to the Brigham decision and how it changed our whole financing. The problem for all of us in whatever community we're in is trying to educate the public in a way that this isn't a linear type of thing. You vote on the budget of a certain whatever millions you're going to be voting on and what that will include if you're interested enough to find that out. But yet, doesn't work that way. Okay, it's not linear. It doesn't go right through to it. And that has been, I think, one of the major challenges we all face in trying to decide that. And so I don't know whether we can, I don't know, I've thought about it a lot to try to figure out how you address it structurally, not just convincing somebody that they should vote positively for the budget or not. But it's a real challenge. And I think whether it's a little school district or whether it's a major school district, I mean, with lots of kids, Vermont, I just find that a really frustrating deal. We've been lucky. We've passed our budgets in this part of the world, middle to ACSD. But I'm not sure it's because people understand it any better. I wish I knew. I'd bottle it and be able to pass it on. But yeah, I think that to me is a real challenge, especially for the school directors and the leadership people trying to figure out how we take that one line from educating students and put it into a finance system, which is not a straight line.
Yeah, I come to this from the municipal viewpoint rather than the educational. I've been involved in town governance on a lot of levels. And I feel like the educational problem is similar what we've got with 252 laboratories of democracy in our little state. And that is a lot of replication of effort. I ran into a problem that hundreds of families in Vermont have, where I had kids in 2 school districts. And it could be that you work for one school district and your kids are in another. But the spring breaks didn't line up. Like, this could be a problem for a lot of years. I'd love to know which school board to go to and say, why don't you follow the standard? But there is no standard. And I went to the Secretary of Ed and I'm like, why don't you just propose a calendar? And then I would know who's not following the calendar. And I'd be like, yo, South Burlington, follow the calendar. There's a huge coordination problem with so many bodies doing the same work across the state. That's
So
all.
I'll just interject on the school calendar one. For those who study the history of education in Vermont, there's a book that can be written on the debates that have gone on about the alignment of the school calendar. And it is one of these intractable problems that nobody's been able to solve.
We did a big study on it many years ago. Elaine Pickney was superintendent of Shelburne area, and I was Franklin Northeast, and we led this commission. We went around the state, we called it Calendar 2.0. I got crucified. Everywhere I went, I had arrows in my back, and people would saying, yes, it should be the same calendar, but it needs to be our calendar here. And the legislature, there's 2 legislators here, they'll tell you that, they all think it's a great idea too, but who's gonna decide what the calendar is gonna be is the problem. And that's part of Vermont's freedom of unity.
I think it's sort of, it's actually a perfect example of why this issue is so complex, because it actually, probably others looking in would say it's not an intractable problem. Why is this a hard thing? One calendar.
Right.
Seems pretty easy. But it's that tension between who makes those decisions and why, and there may be some really, at one point, were some really important community-based reasons why. So calendar, which seems like a really easy example.
Yeah.
Is a perfect illustration of why this is so challenging.
And just as an illustration of a butterfly effect, for those of us who live in resort communities, depending on where the tourists are coming from, their student calendars impact the schedules at a local level. So you oftentimes will have different periods in different parts of the state with different holiday periods based on where the tourists are coming from. That impacts the ability of the parents to be at work or not be at work, which then influences the local calendar decision.
Which all goes to say that all of this
Yeah.
is complicated and there's a lot of nuance to it. And one of the things we've mentioned in our first draft of the report, there is no silver bullet. There's no simple way to make it perfect for everybody and make it be more affordable and sustainable. Whatever we end up doing, and when I say we, I don't mean this commission, I mean as a state, it's going to be complex and there's going to be different levers that are going to have to be approached. And we're going to have to try some things, and some things are going to work well. Other things may not, and may have to go trial and error some. There's no simple solutions. If there were, there wouldn't be a commission. The legislature would have already made decisions. We'd be all set. We'd all be like, yay, but it's complicated.
I would just say, somebody here pointed out, we should always keep student outcomes at the forefront of the decisions that we make. And the school calendar, you talk about career and technical education centers, they often draw from different catchment areas to the same center. And you have kids who miss 2 weeks of learning because their schedules, the calendars don't line up.
Yes, and then.
Yeah, my perspective is as a former superintendent of schools, so it's a little bit different from yours, but I'm thinking about looking at your mandate to suggest a statewide vision for, among other things, efficient education. Efficiency has 2 components. One is the revenue, and the other is what we spend it on. And I see and hear in the news, of course, about the property taxes and everything. And I see in your mandate and in your committees that you've set up and in your framework, there seems to be a focus on how to generate the funds, the financial. Half of our agenda tonight is about that. And I wrote you an email about this, Megan. I've raised the notion of coming together as a state and looking at what it is we're teaching and how we're teaching it. With over 100 school districts in the state, with 288 schools, each school cannot do evidence-based instruction. They can't do the research for that. But what if there was a clearinghouse not a mandate, but a clearinghouse that provided to superintendents, that provided to teachers and principals resources about evidence-based effective instructional techniques and material. Things like the way we group, when we teach things, blended learning, team teaching, group instruction, differentiated staffing. Things like how we can integrate curriculum and the knowledge, skills, and attitudes we want to instill in our kids in different ways. Across our country, there are so many different ways of going about answering that question. And as a superintendent, I remember very clearly, my biggest challenge was making sure that our money, our tuition dollars were being spent efficiently. You'd have teachers come up with all kinds of ideas. And I'd see my innovative colleagues across the town trying these wild schemes that had no evidence, no database at all. How do we as a state guide that kind of innovation so that it is evidence-based? And it's too big a job for one school district, I think. I think it is something that is clear, and I would just invite the commission to consider, as well as looking at the revenue side of things, consider what it is that we're asking our schools to do and how they're going to do that.
Yeah, I've lived in Vermont for 8 years now, from upstate New York, and my wife's from Colorado. Of those 8 years, I've spent the last 5 years working to keep the school that my son now goes to open. That work, he's a second grader, that work started before he was even in that school. I've crossed paths with at least 4 people on this commission as part of that, up to the State Board of Education, district and everything. That's hard. It's taken a lot of effort on my part. I see John Flowers writing furiously away. He's written articles about me as part of this. And, you know, it takes a lot of effort, and there's school board members here who know me well. You know, and so getting some of that figured out, somebody who's new to the state, it's a lot of effort to try and figure out how to move forward in a way that's successful. And I have not seen a reason yet that the school my son goes to should close.
Do we have folks listening? Yeah. Kristen, join. Yeah, I'm just making it so that the folks in the room can see. Yeah, Kristen, go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. My comments are sort of trifold. My thoughts are sort of based around what the challenges are and what's working. And for me personally, small rural schools, they're working. And I wanted to comment about, or just maybe voice my appreciation for John Castle's feedback in the meeting earlier today. In that, with Act 46 and the report out that was supposed to be done that hadn't been done in the timely manner and when it was unearthed and shared, I think before anything happens, we need to go back to really seriously look at that. Is it working? I mean, I would be hard pressed to really put faith in it. It's frustrating the support. I'm a school board member, full disclosure. We face a lot of challenges. Obviously, it's going to be another really challenging year for us. Lots of late meetings, and it's been frustrating from that perspective where. I know it's a lot of heavy lifting, but I really feel strongly that tapping the brakes and really looking hard at Act 46 and whether or not it's working really needs to happen before I don't know. I'm pretty passionate about that.
Thanks, Kristen. Matthew DeCret.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
We can, yep.
Okay, full disclosure, I am a teacher at the high school. One challenge I think that hasn't been brought up and that should be considered is that schools are being asked to provide services that maybe haven't traditionally been part of what schools deliver. And all of those things require people and resources and money. And I think that in many cases, it's a pull that isn't necessarily fully thought about when we think about what a school is in this sort of new day and age.
Great. Thank you. I think it's Kelsey.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I just wanted to mention one thing that hasn't been raised yet. Well, first I'll just echo other comments about, the strengths of Vermont schools. We have excellent schools. That's part of what drew us to move here. And what makes them excellent is the incredible teachers and administrators who create these amazing communities that kids love to go to. But one of the things that hasn't been discussed that I think is a continual problem is that, the health insurance costs for teachers just continue to rise by double digits every single year. And that just imposes so much, difficulty on the school districts, having to put these budgets before voters, and more money is going to health insurance companies. So I think it would be wonderful for the state to figure out how to, and I realize this is a problem throughout Vermont, we pay the most for healthcare, more than anyone I've heard, but just having help from the state and negotiating to get, to stop this sort of runaway cost of the teachers' health insurance, I think would be really helpful so that we're putting our money towards actually, having wonderful teachers and delivering excellent education to students and not to these other things. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I just have a follow-up for a couple of the educators. There were some comments about sort of this tension between autonomy, teacher autonomy, educator autonomy, and sort of more prescriptive programs, if you will. And I was just hoping you might be able to perhaps be a little bit more explicit about your thoughts on that. I think I heard it from two, but I wasn't sure. It was sort of implied, and I just wanted to see if there was something explicit there.
Yeah, I sort of think there's a difference, and I don't know, I think we're all probably from this district, that there has been in the elementary school a very prescriptive literacy program that from somebody who's been in education for quite a long time, and I substitute, but then I get to see kindergarten through sixth grade, and I sort of get to see that continuum. And I've just made observations about that kind of teaching somehow doesn't seem to fit well with often a third of the kids, especially kindergarten and first grade, because it's very repetitive and it requires a lot of time for that repetitiveness. And many of the younger children were finding they don't have the attention span anymore. Their minds quickly go somewhere else, sort of thing. I think that's part of it, but I think also it takes the creativity out of it, out of teaching, out of sort of developing more inclusive or broader uses of the material, rather than just every day, this is what you do and it's the same every day. The letters change, the words change. And it sort of is hard as a teacher who wants to be creative to stick to that. And yet I know that they're told they have to follow it, they have to do it. It's no, even if you think maybe your kids are ready, there seems to be a lot of limitation. And so then you wonder what do teachers learn when they go to get educated from teachers? Are they being taught to simply follow these directions that come along? Or are they taught a little broader sort of thing? So I just find them kind of very, not matching the kids that, well, an advantage of being working with, all the grade levels. I observed kids who in kindergarten, you could tell that it was not sticking at all. It was not, many of them couldn't pay attention. It just wasn't. And then I end up seeing them in first grade and second grade. Many times it begins to click in, but I'm not sure that those early times were terribly helpful for them. And then they often need the intensive work to get them caught up. So we're sort of working with a lot of kids, second, third, fourth grade, with a lot of remediation. And part of it, I think, is for them, this was not the best way to teach. And teachers maybe should have 2 or 3 ways that they can teach, and that they can put the kids that learn it this way, great. But what about offering something different to those that you can tell they're really not getting it? Is there a different way of doing it? I think is sort of part of what I'm seeing is a bit of a problem.
Go ahead, and then there's someone on the screen. No,
Okay.
go ahead.
I can speak to that exactly in math. I taught elementary school, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade for 15 years. And over the course of the 15 years, we went from one set of curriculum, with which we could be somewhat creative and it's sort of in a general flow of our own as an elementary school, to when we became a whole district. We had a period of time where there was really sort of no curriculum for a couple of years, and we could do our own thing, for better or worse. And then there was another packaged curriculum to which we were supposed to stick with fidelity, which I did not do. And for better or worse. So again, going back to the comment about sticking with a packaged curriculum is what this lady was talking about in English. If you're moving at a set speed and your audience isn't with you, but you've got to move on and you're only doing the handouts and there's really no creativity and hands-on engaging with the individual thinker in front of you, then you are going to lose people and they're going to need to be remediated down the road.
Oh, maybe we lost our person on the screen. I'll give them a second. I've got 2 more in the room.
So as a retired teacher, I experienced in Virginia, talking to the curriculum director who said, I will know I have done my job when I walk into your room and hear what you're teaching and walk into the geography class next door and they're teaching the same thing. Never mind the fact that I was dealing with the remedial students and he was dealing with the AP students. And that's, I think what they're talking about is prescriptive kind of curriculum that says, it's Thursday, you have to be on Rome, because by Friday, you have to be on, the successor empire. And I think that is dangerous in education, but on the other side, when teachers are allowed to do whatever they want to do, how many units do you think got taught about dinosaurs? Oh my God. There's dinosaurs every year. And so there has to be a balance. I think your question was, talked a little bit about that. I think teachers, you lose interest in the profession if you're told what to do every day. But if you're left to your own devices, you're going to do what you want to do. And is that necessarily what's best for the kids? So you can try to walk. I think the idea behind education is to walk that balance. Give us the guidelines, tell us what you want us to cover, and then let us do it the way we know how to do it, because we're the professionals in it. And I think that's gets to the core of the question that you were asking.
Then I just don't know how I want to phrase this, but I want to go back and say I've disclosed myself as a parent and a school board member. I'm also a special education teacher. And I want to talk a little bit about the idea of Yes, curriculum can be too rigid. But I know that you were talking earlier about what works and research-based methodology. And I think we can't go so far into creativity that we don't stick with a research-based method. If not a canned program, at least something that's within approach that is considered to be research-based. And I don't want to lose that in the discussion because a lot of the kids that I see, I can go and pick out where in a research-based methodology they missed out. And so I don't want to go too far into creativity.
Go ahead. I'll flip this on.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Jamie McCallum. I live around here and I'm a school board member here. The question on the screen, someone asked about healthcare. And I'm just curious if that, I was gonna ask something about that. I'm just curious if that is something that falls within the scope of your commission. Like, to my mind, the dilemma that you raised in the beginning about local control versus has to some extent a lot to do with cost constraints we face. And a lot of those constraints are about healthcare. And when I think of 5 or 10 years down the line, continued healthcare costs rising like they are will simply destroy the education system that we have here. And that we've sort of come to understand and appreciate. And so I'm just wondering if those kinds of questions that are a little bit larger, that might not feel super immediate, but fall within the scope of your commission at all.
I can sort of take a stab at answering it. The one answer is it does fall under the scope if it is something that the commission says, if we could do X about healthcare, that would help. Again, we're not a decision-making body.
Right.
And there are some things that we've acknowledged that make this a challenge that are perhaps outside of the realm of control of the education system. So it does fall under our purview. It will be not a helpful recommendation if it's something like, well, actually, I'll use a different example. We have a housing shortage in Vermont. That is real, that helps. It's the opposite. It makes it harder, makes all these issues harder. And it's not necessarily something that we can control, but we can acknowledge that it is a factor. So if that's how I would answer healthcare, I'd happy to have commission members.
I think we have some specific ideas related to healthcare that have been generated as part of our process, looking at the structure for statewide bargaining. But I think there is an acknowledgement that school district employee healthcare is a subset of a larger crisis impacting the healthcare system in Vermont in writ large. So we can talk about the mechanics of statewide bargaining for health insurance or the plan design that's offered to school employees. But absent that, it's more lifting up the issue as state policymakers need to look at this.
Thank you.
On the healthcare issue, I don't think anyone's asking the commission to figure out how to control healthcare costs. Obviously, we don't know that answer. But it's whether it's decoupled from the school's cost component, which goes into all the equations, which then determine what amount of money we get. And since we have a statewide system, which we're pretty lucky on, because that did relieve a lot of this minutia to some degree of negotiating percentages and all those kinds of things over years, which were really tedious and difficult. But we still, with the way it's going, I would agree with whoever said it's going to maybe Jamie said that, it's going to bankrupt us. You can't have 15% increases in a large segment of your budget. And where do you take it? You take it out of people, which means you have fewer teachers. So I think, to me, that's a really important component of, is there an answer? No, there's no answer. But in the commissions, there may be some benefit to saying we're going to decouple this from the way educational costs are computed. Maybe it's not possible, but to me, that's a huge issue of a big segment of what we're paying for through property taxes for education.
As far as the ideas to address, one thought that I've had as I've been around some of these conversations, and I do not work in education, I just got involved because I was a second grader, is in terms of the definition of what is a school. I know the legislature did some stuff with community schools and what that means, but as I've talked to educators, they're doing so much more nowadays than just school. And part of it, I wonder if people didn't understand, like, how does that change it? How does it change what an organization, if you want to call it, could do if it was something different than a school? There was some other term that was able to fill some of these roles, and it's continuing to develop some other pathways or whatever for some of this work to get done. And maybe does that decouple some of the funding questions from some of these challenges? I don't know, but is there a term that could be created that to move this conversation ahead?
I think it's a huge point. Defining what is the role of the school. Is it to provide an education for the students who attend it each day, or by necessity has its role broadened so much that it actually, in order to get those kids a good education, a school has to do so much more. And so its role has changed. And that's why the community schools model is out there with that, recognizes that it's much more of a wraparound sort of service. And, but it's, as we talk about, especially when this moves into the legislative realm, when we talk about what is the role of a school, that's going to be one of the hardest questions, because if people are saying the cost of education is too high, and part of the reason it's so high is because of the services schools provide, I'm not quite sure how we balance that.
You make me think, both of you make me think of just the times I've seen a community come together around what the purpose of that school building is and use it in a variety of ways. I was in one school, we had a perfectly fine library, and the town built its own library. Why isn't this a public facility? Structure, daycare, mentorships, work studies, internships, interacting with the community. That could be guided by a central, not a mandate, but a resource bank. Here are some ideas and incentives to do that as well.
One of the things that we talked about at one point was the co-location of services, where something like CSAC comes into the building and they do their job in building, but they're not part of the education budget. They're not part of the services that the school has to worry about, because that's not their job. I don't know if it's still there, but I think Winooski had a dental program for a while, and the school wasn't paying for it, but it was providing these services. And I agree, I saw Mission Creek my entire career. I wasn't hired to be an educator anymore. I was hired to be an educator, a counselor, first line of defense, to watch when kids are failing, provide all the kinds of social services, none of which I was trained for. My background in education was, how do you deliver instruction in a way that gets through to kids, not, is that kid going to become a shooter? And when I think I heard many of my colleagues kind of blew a gasket when the suggestion was put together that the way that we could protect students in schools was train certain teachers to carry guns, and it was like, when does it end? Now we have to not only know how to teach Johnny how to read, we need to shoot. We need to know how to shoot, so the co-location of services, let the professionals do what they know to do, but located in the schools or near the schools, school, some sort of proximate, opportunity. But hopefully that doesn't increase the education budget, because the education budgets are already, their umbrella is holding so many of those services that, at what point is the part of the budget that's going to educate kids a small part of the budget, when we're paying for all these other services? Is there any way we can rethink Yeah, I think that all those services are valuable. They are great and everybody needs them. And, you know, when you have a kid that comes to class who's fed, who is, you know, has had a good night's sleep, that's totally different than dealing with a kid that's distracted for all these different reasons. So they need those services. But then to say, well, the education budget needs to pay for that, I think is disingenuous to what we're trying to get at here. So maybe let the professionals who know what they're doing in these other fields be the ones that are funded separately and really clean the education, so that you know, talking about unfunded mandates and all those sorts of things. And let's make it about education again. And then these other services are provided by people that are not, you know, being paid for out of the school budget.
All right, I'm gonna move us on the screen. We'll do one more on the screen and then we're gonna move on to the next question. I'm not gonna get up and flip it. Tiger, go for it.
Hi, yeah, I think it's been alluded to by several commenters recently, but one of the things that hasn't really been discussed is all the meals that Vermont schools are serving now. And I know this is going to be a sensitive topic to some, but obviously there's a cost to that. I think it was being picked up by the federal government during COVID, but I don't believe it is anymore. I'm not really apprised of specifically what it is, but I'm sure it's costing us. I know that some schools are providing breakfast and lunch, and you know, that's a huge cost. And I think that might have shifted from alternative services, maybe SNAP benefits or other things where families now can depend on, well, our kids are going to be fed by the school, so we don't need to worry about that. And it's been picked up, as I understand it, by the school budgets. And that, you know, and there may be other places like that, but I just want to put that out there as a possibility.
Great. Thank you. All right. Education finance system, local decision-making and shared costs.
That's
All of it.
Yeah, one more time.
There you go.
So Vermont's education finance system, it's complicated. And so just would be an understatement. So a little brief history, I think, is important for context. For many, many years, Vermont funded its schools through a local property tax. You had your local grand list. There was one grand list. All the houses, all the commercial property was all in one grand list. And there was a municipal tax and there was an education tax that funded your budget. On top of that, there were a variety of so-called foundation formula that existed for many decades. And the earliest one can be traced back to the 60s. And the concept was that the state would provide a certain amount of money for every school district based on the ADM in the school. And what would happen is year after year after year, the legislature would start to underfund the state portion of that. So every 10 years or so, there'd be a cycle where the system would collapse because all of a sudden there wasn't as much state funding. Property taxes went up. There was a revolt. The legislature acted. The solution was to come up with a new funding formula. That went on for a number of years, pretty much every decade, until the 1990s. There was a local family in this area from Whiting that filed a court challenge that led to the Brigham decision, as you've heard about earlier. And the decision of the Supreme Court said, listen, we cannot have this system where there's this inequity in wealth. We need a system that ensures that there's equity in resources that are available to the school district, so that your school district's ability to fund its schools based on the budget you set should be based on property wealth. That gave rise to the legislative response, which was Act 60. That had its own set of problems. It was a completely new and different way of funding schools. That inevitably collapsed and gave way to Act 68. Act 68, big change there was we bifurcated the grand list. So we created a residential grand list and a non-residential grand list. The non-residential grand list, it's a uniform tax rate, applies, doesn't matter where the property is. So all your second homes, commercial property, rental properties, those are all taxed at a uniform rate. And within those communities, the residential properties, owner-occupied properties, they're subject to a property tax rate that's variable based on your per pupil spending. I won't go into all the mechanics of the system because it is super complicated, but the most important thing to understand, and to this gentleman's point earlier, the system is not linear, but the most linear you can get from point A to point B is this concept of per pupil spending. That's the most important. The total budget is meaningless in the concept in the context of setting the tax rate. It's your per pupil spending. That's really what sets it. Unfortunately, there are a few other variables. One of the other variables is the CLA, which is really a measure of equalizing property values based on past sales. So that unfortunately introduces another variable that creates a lot of confusion and a real disconnect at the local level. But anyway, long story short, what you spend on a per pupil basis is what drives your tax rate. That's one key thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is your property wealth does not impact the funds you're able to receive. So whether you live in a so-called gold town, as they would know pre-Act 60, or a non-gold town, your tax rate based on what you're spending per pupil isn't going to change. So I'll leave it there.
You can click the next one, Megan. So these are just some of the big budget challenges and cost drivers in education finance. But I think people have already mentioned personnel is roughly around 80% of any school budget, any of your education spending. And there are a lot of factors in there that local school boards don't have a lot of control. Special education is a mandate. 40% of it's supposed to be paid by the federal government. That was in the law in 1974. So far, they've never paid more than 20% in a given year. So that falls onto the individual states. Facilities, Vermont, we have by some reports the second worst facilities in the United States. Only Alaska's worse than us. So that's not a good thing. People have mentioned the healthcare piece. And then we also tuition a lot of students because we have a lot of small schools where there's no scale. And so maybe I have an elementary school, our kids go someplace else for high school. The delivery models, class and school size, district size, and infrastructure we've talked about already. The one other thing I wanted to make sure that we mentioned is that the last two times we talked about this funding, I've said at these meetings, the fundamental concept behind the Brigham decision was for people to have each taxpayer had the same amount of pain to raise the money across the state. I've had several people say, thank you for saying that. It makes sense to me now that if I live in Stowe or if I live in Berkshire, it doesn't matter, the pain is gonna be the same. Somebody told me today, please stop using the word pain, say commitment. So the commitment in terms of the impact on your own finances is equalized. And that is something we've done better than any other state in the United States. And every independent report has shown that. The problem is, and Oliver talked about it a little bit, more than one problem. One of the problems is that it's really hard for a local person to figure out what their tax impact is. And you could be in a situation where your board submits education spending that's declining and your tax rate could still go up because of decisions that are made in other places across the state or things that are happening in healthcare or a big new building in another place. And we're all helping to pay for that. So it's difficult to explain that to people when you're asking them to vote yes on a local budget.
And on that, I neglected to mention, there is a strong, whenever you're dealing with any kind of tax policy, and Dave Sharp knows this as well as I do, there's a strong correlation between equity and complexity. The more equitable your tax system is, the more complex it becomes. And think about it in terms of this, an easy analogy is the sales tax, right? Sales tax is simple, 6%. You go to buy a product at the store, it's a 6% tax, but that pain.
That's a regressive tax.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not a regressive tax. That's the one nice thing about it, but yeah.
So it's really easy to understand the sales tax. But on the other hand, it's very regressive, and the pain is very different depending on your ability to pay.
And with that, what questions do you have about the finance system and what suggestions do you have about the finance system?
I have some questions that I'm going to try to be articulate about. Has there been any research about the CLA and how it's been impacted by the pandemic? Living in a very small town, a lot of properties that I found sold for exorbitant amounts when people were wanting to remote work. Those are non-residential properties. Our CLA last year was 66. our 9% budget increase resulted in a 39% property tax increase. Any thoughts on how, like, why, how, what do we do about that?
The purpose of the CLA is to make sure that we're all we all share equally in the tax on our property while they're on our grand list. And, you know, we had two things that happened. The grand list across the state went up, I think, probably everywhere, some places more than others. And just because that goes up doesn't necessarily, you still should be generating the same amount of money, so therefore your tax rate shouldn't necessarily change that much. But we also had a big increase in how much we had to spend because we lost all these federal COVID dollars. So the pandemic sort of affected us in two ways. We got reliant on a heavy dose of federal dollars for our schools, and it drove up our property values. So when the federal dollars ended, tax rates still had to go up, even though our grand list across the state went up. But it's really there to make sure that a town who is up to date on their appraisal is treated equally to a town that may be 10 years behind on their most recent appraisal, so that they're taxed equally.
But it should be an apples to apples, right?
Yeah.
It should be sort of, your home value is $100,000, so your tax rate has to be higher in order to ensure you're contributing your fair share to the education fund. If your home value is reappraised and now it's $200,000, your tax rate should go down. So you, at the end of the day, you should theoretically be contributing the same amount of money to the ed fund. Your tax bill looks the same, your rate will change. But because the value of your home goes up, the rate can go down. If you haven't gone through a reappraisal and the CLA keeps going up, the rate goes up.
How do the non-residential properties figure in?
That's set at one rate across the state.
Mhm.
And so if I live, I happen to live in the town of Berkshire. So the non-homestead rate in Berkshire is going to be the same as it is in Bennington, is going to be the same as it is anyplace else in state, whatever that number is. And one of the things that this commission has talked about a little bit, and I know the legislature's talked about, should there be some type of decoupling of that. There's been proposals talked about where maybe if your town spends above what the average is, so let's say your town spends $1.75 and the state rate is $1.50, maybe the people in that town would have to go up to $1.75 on their non-homestead. There's talk about that stuff. I haven't seen any real policy,
So
specific legislation.
yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is that the CLA impacts both the non-residential and the residential properties equally in that town.
Okay.
But it's important to go back to history because with Act 60, it was a uniform grand list. And one of the reasons why there were unintended consequences, and one of them was people found a way to game the system. And there were these private foundations that were created in the gold towns where they would basically go around to everybody and say, hey, everybody kick into this pot, we'll give money to our local schools, and we can drive our education spending way down because that money doesn't count towards your tax rate. And that was one of the key reasons why the grand list was bifurcated and there was a uniform rate set for non-residential properties because that removed the incentive for those things and they all collapsed.
Part of the change with 68 was to try to resolve that issue.
Yep.
Thank you.
In the back? Yeah. Hi, thank you. Bart Wilson. I live in Storm here and I'm also on the school board here. I've thought of property tax for a long time. In fact, even when I ran for state rep back in 2018, it was the most complicated thing that people ask about. Well, how does this work? How does this work? And, with the complexity of our system, I think it's really time to decouple education spending from property taxes. Possibly keep the non-residential, because I don't want to give up that money selfishly. But have it based on a portion that already isn't based on, meal tax, all that kind of thing already. To have it based on income, because that's progressive in Vermont, as opposed to having the homestead rebate for folks, that money coming back, which is complicated as well. It's 1 year arrears. It's based on, previous tax information I paid. So if it goes up high, we had to make an adjustment this year for people, right? That kind of thing. I think it's really time, and because people just don't understand it. And no matter on a school board, trying to figure out how do I educate people on this complexity? And it just, I think has a lot to do with budgets failing even this last year. It needs to be simplified, and the only way I know how to simplify it would be to make it an income tax-based system. Even if you ended up, having it, some kind of a regional tax, right? For different areas, similar to property tax, like a town, you have a little extra tax or something like that. But I really think that we need to simplify because it just isn't working. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. One of Mr. Olson mentioned the only sort of reference point we can use is per pupil costs. And even in the present time that we're in developing budgets this year, there's the 118% above that we're battling with. And yet that data as to where that 118 comes in per pupil cost is gathered from all the schools in the state, some of which are not very well performing, okay, and who have been constantly battered by budgets failing. So school districts at the upper end of that number then suffer potentially when we have to meet the mean, or whatever that mean or average is going to be between all of those. So I really worry that that part of it is going to mediocritize a whole part of education in order to get to that mean. And it's another fear that I have in systems that are big enough, which are going to control that.
You're the one, you're talking the excess
Threshold, but I mean, most districts are looking at that. It's those that are close to it, which we are. And I just find that to be, I understand the difficulty, but that's the trap again, when we put it into the realm of you can't go over that, excess spending number. If you do, well, you may pay for it in the budget. But on the other side, you're going to have to move yourself more toward the middle. And some of the people that are determining where that middle is are not performing as they should be, I think.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deirdre Kelly, and I'm also a school board member in Allison County. I just want to say that there's nothing of this is simple. And of course, we're not asking the commission to come up with solutions. That's outrageous, especially with the task of a short amount of time. But I've been sitting here thinking about all the time you've put into it, and probably many of us, is that your commission doesn't have an outrageous task, but you could be really impactful. I just want to remind you of that, because I imagine there could be a lot to like, how do we create the solution? But I think if you had a few really strong recommendations that the legislature could take on, this could be exciting, because this is so important and so complicated. So I'm taking a big view picture in this moment, which is to support what you said. We don't know each other, but which is I invite the commission to really think about Vermont NEA's recommendation, and I'm not part of the NEA at all. But this idea of what would it look like to change the funding system? Your commission isn't going to change that. That's an interesting idea, especially when you think of the idea of the property tax at a different time was hooked into people's wealth. Yeah. That's not the case when our school board heard from someone who makes $28,000 and their house just went up, I think $300,000. So to unhook that is not radical. It's just to say wealth and housing is not hooked in the same way, especially when I think of farmers and people on fixed income. The other thing I think of is what we haven't done well that we could do is to really look at the financial implications of merger and consolidation. Agency of Education hasn't had great information out, not because they haven't tried, but it's complicated. And when I look at the data and when I look at great reputable sources, there is really a lot of information to say we don't know yet. That there's some towns that merging has saved money. There's a lot that it hasn't. And in the big picture, I worry that we are jumping too fast. And I think the commission did a great job to say, previous report and early in the fall to say, it's not quite clear. The idea of merging, it's not quite clear if that's going to save us money. The idea of merging, having like very specific pupil size, it isn't quite clear the financial implications. Not that you've done anything wrong, it's just the data's, the real impactful analysis hasn't been done. And so I was a little curious about when the commission shifted that in their report. There's like a policy part of the report that I saw recently, and then sort of the recommendations, and those two categories have shifted up to high priorities.
I just want to make sure that I'm really, really clear, because we just spent a lot of time talking about this today. There are no recommendations still. We had some conversations today about making that clearer in the draft. Those are, nothing has been elevated among others. What this commission is trying to convey is, here are all the policy considerations. We have not had an opportunity to look into depth and make recommendations because this timeline doesn't allow us the ability to do that. And one of the things we talked about today is making it clearer in the final version of the report that what you're seeing is basically a recitation of all the things that have been discussed. It is not a recommendation and is not intended to be one. So for folks who do have that question, we are not at the recommendation level. Our recommendation or our findings, I mean, in a really summarized level, is it's really important to understand the complexity, that it is going to take difficult action in all of these policy areas. That's a finding and a recommendation in and of itself. And we're trying to convey that to the General Assembly.
There's no silver bullet.
There is no silver bullet. Yes, that's now.
And specifically on the topic of consolidation, I think it's important for everybody, including the commission, to think there's really, I think, 3 different flavors of consolidation. And it's important that we all be clear about, when we're talking about consolidation, what we're really talking about. So one is governance consolidation, right? Which is, basically, your school district, your boards, et cetera, how you're sort of managing your resources. Second is elementary school consolidation. And I think that tends to bring out, a lot of concerns and very legitimate concerns that people have. And the third is high school consolidation. And those 3 flavors of consolidation all have very different implications.
I guess I'd say the last piece, I want other people to jump in, is I would just invite the commission to ensure that there's no priority of consolidation or merging until there's like a deep analysis, financial analysis of that. That's what I would say, because I think we don't know yet. We have a lot of statistics to crunch, and I worry that there's a strong wind at the legislative, rightfully so, to make change. And I wouldn't want us to jump to that's one of the important solutions when the data just isn't out yet. So, thank you.
So now we've gotten to the meat of the conversation, in my view. There's been a lot of talk statewide about schools spending too much money. I think school boards and superintendents try to be as frugal as they can be and do as good a job for their children as they can. So we should start from a point of view of saying, how can we do things better for our children in our school districts? And if that costs less, great. If it costs more, then we have an issue we have to talk about. Act 6068 has far outlasted any other funding formula in the state. Nearly 4 decades of Act 60 and its various iterations. And there's some talk now, well, let me just say, it hasn't fixed all the inequities. It has fixed some of them, improved maybe from 4 to 1 to 2 to 1. And the inequity has more to do these days with the income wealth of communities than it does the property wealth of communities. So maybe Act 60 has outlived its usefulness. And maybe it's time to reinvent how we do taxation for schools. There is some talk about returning to a foundation formula. Maybe that's a way to go. It's simple, it's easy to explain, people understand it. Is it going to violate Brigham?
can we design a type of foundation formula that improves equity, not returns equity to the old inequities of the past, but rather can we design a foundation system that improves equity and at the same time is easy to understand and local voters know what they're voting for. I think my view is that's the big challenge of this legislative session. Can we do better to educate our children? Yes, we can. And that's an important discussion that we need to have. I'm not sure that would be much cheaper if we found a better way to educate our children.
Yeah, so I just wanted to bring up like the glaring concern of someone who's not an educator and has not been involved in school governance. We have, based on the income of the average Vermonter, the most expensive pure pupil education system of the 50 states. And our outcomes, okay, it depends where you look, I guess.
The Agency of Education, excuse me for interrupting, the Agency of Education says we're 5th in the country. We're not a big
Based on
outlier.
income within the state?
No,
Or just
our
pure
per pupil spending.
Okay, per pupil divided by median income, number one. Okay, and our outcomes are above median, but are not top 5 on literacy scores, on math scores. That's, I think, the concern of the outsider looking at the education system.
So I wanted to thank Barb for bringing up the issue of moving to an income-based system. And I know the Vermont NEA recently endorsed that and was supported by Public Assets Institute. And, you know, when I think about it and talk to folks in our district about it is, if your property value increases, that doesn't say very much necessarily about your ability to pay tax. But if your income does go up, it does at least have a more direct connection to your ability to pay. And I understand there are always pluses and minuses, and some people point to the challenge with income being volatile. But I was happy to see, although I'd like to look into it more, Public Assets said that was true, but maybe is less true now. And I will, you know, and I want to add that I think we can all appreciate that property values have been unbelievably volatile. I mean, you know, in our district, the cost per pupil only went up 2%, but people were paying, you know, increase in tax of 50% and more. And I think ultimately, while the CLA, and I do understand how it works and why it's there, it's part of our complex fairness, various ways that we deal with fairness. It works if property values aren't changing very much in any given year. And even then, maybe you can adjust your budget even to help people, help taxes not go up too much because of the CLA. But when it rises at the rates it has been, and again, this connects to COVID and many other things going on. That's what's really, I think, brought us to this moment in a lot of ways. The fact that when you have a very modest increase in per pupil spending, which is the biggest, you know, determiner of that initial tax rate, but people's actual tax they pay is going up so much. Finding ways to eliminate that part of the way our system works is what's been on my mind a lot. And one way is moving to an income-based system, again, with a progressive, you know, scale and so forth. It's also occurred to me that if we didn't do that, and I know the NEA has sort of a graduated way to get there, but if that was just rejected outright and we still kept our CLA system, I think there are ways to even just reform how we do that in a way that would make it more transparent and less volatile. You could restrict the range of the CLA in a fair way so that it never got beyond 0.9 to 1.1, let's say, or something like that. I mean, I would also be interested in thinking about, I think we're moving, and folks can help me understand if this is true, but that we're moving to a 6-year cycle so that everybody gets, has townwide reassessments on a more regular schedule, at least that's the goal. And if that really were the case, if every town on a 6-year schedule was being reassessed, it seems to me you could just wait and not apply a mid-cycle CLA, which would be more predictive. It would introduce some inequity, but the CLA already introduces inequity because it's applied to everybody in a town, even though it really is only about the sales that happened. So I think there are ways to keep the system we have that is so rooted in equity at its core, not going back to a foundation formula, is what I mean, which our experience with it is that it produced too much inequity. I would like to stay with the system we have now and reform how we deal with the CLA and other portions of how we finance the system.
I wonder, given the tax, talk about taxes and changing the funding, if that would enable a district to change where the students come from for a particular rural school or urban school, which might affect the need to close or keep open a school. Does that make sense? So if, what I'm saying is, if we didn't take property tax from town A to fund school A, and we opened up an income-based property tax and had it more general, income-based tax and had it more generalized, I don't know what that would look like, then perhaps school A that might be at risk of closing because its population is too small, might be able to take students from another school, and it doesn't have to just be in town A, but it could be the perimeter of town A. I'm not suggesting school choice.
So I think that's sort of where Act 46 was going with larger governance units. So you could have a larger catchment area with multiple schools in there, and you have that flexibility to move resources with a single tax rate, whether it's an income tax or a property tax. That was sort of the general goal of Act 46. And some people have some things to say about that.
Actually, in the back, you're first, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna recommend anything, but what I'm hearing and what I've heard for the last 5 to 7 years is from one side saying closing schools never saves money, and the other side saying closing schools saves us a lot of money. There are schools that have closed in Vermont, and I've not seen, as a member of the school board who is actively looking for this information, show me the numbers. I mean, that should be an easy thing to do, for the commission to say, in your 3 different categories, schools that united for governance, I'm assuming that's changing to a supervisory union from the district or whatever it is. What was the savings in that category? Closing elementary schools, was there a savings? And I know at least 2 cases where there was a very large amount of savings. And the third, the high schools, what was the financial impact of that? We could, it seems to me, answer that question, because schools have actually closed in Vermont. People have been able to do that. Why can't we get that answer? How much money did those districts save? And, is this a way forward for us? It seems to be like, and then the side that says, we don't have that data, we don't have that data. It's always that answer, well, since we don't have that data, we can't do anything about this. Well, let's put that data together, and then that answers the question for both sides. And I think that's something this commission should be able to do. I mean, it's not like 1,000 schools have closed in Vermont, it's a manageable number. Tell us what it is. So.
Did you want to? Okay. I don't know who was first.
Just one point. I hope the commission, after you spend this time, are pretty bold in what your recommendations are going to be. Because none of these are going to be easy, and we're not always going to agree with them. But I think it's important to actually come up with something that's fairly bold and is going to be effective rather than just trying to tweak the edges. And I was reading some history the other day, just this had nothing to do with education. In 1955, there was a number of the big milk buyers in New England said, you can't have milk in cans anymore, okay? A huge change. It changed our state radically because of that one thing. You have to buy a bulk tank. We're not gonna pay for it, but you gotta buy it. That meant half the farms disappeared. So the whole fabric of Vermont from the mid-1950s all the way along changed radically by that. It wasn't a government doing it. Oh, the state had to step in and then figure out how they're gonna regulate bulk tanks rather than cans. However, that was an unbelievably bold move which changed everything for what we think of as Vermont, with hundreds and thousands of farms with 25 cows. Now to look what we have. That wasn't all related to bulk tank, but that was a huge move by some above authority which said that. So it's not education, but it was a bold move and it made a huge difference in the way Vermont fabric sort of set up. My brother's a dairy
Well,
farmer.
and all those old cellar bowls that are remnants of that, they're all on roads with no power. You need power to a bulk tank.
Many, all sorts of reasons, but still, that was it.
One, just kind of being around education finance and having to learn about it as a volunteer. I'm still confused by it at times, and I just think if you can't understand something, it's very hard to care about it. There's just that reality. And then the other piece, and I've been confused being a part of this district here, is we have been fortunate to pass the budgets. And my understanding from people in the district is we're meeting our mandates for doing what we need to do. There's an incentive to spend less. And this comment will seem very strange in the times we're in right now. But is there also an incentive for people to spend more? If the system has an incentive to only spend less and drive down per pupil cost so that it can look good in some lights, is there any other mechanism present for a floor? Or is it just spend less and can look good on a sheet?
There's no floor, but there is the student weights that we apply to per pupil, how you count your pupils. So that if you are in an area that has a high level of poverty, you get to count as if you have more students. And that provides more taxing capacity for your community. In other words, you can keep your tax rate the same, but it will generate more money because you theoretically have more pupils. And so the idea there is that school districts would use that taxing capacity, as they do in Winooski, to spend more on student need and student services.
Another way to answer that question, I think the floor is also dictated by the regulatory requirements you need to meet, right? So that essentially provides the floor.
Take one more and then I'm going to move us on because we want to make sure we give people sort of a unrelated to a prompt chance at the end. But go ahead.
Yeah, just a kind of follow up from what Peter just said. Unfortunately, though, the last budget fiascos that happened, many of the districts that really should have been able to use that money, like Slate Valley and other areas, they ended up having to slash their budgets because they took 5 times or more to half their budget. So it didn't work, right? The very people that, the weighting study was supposed to benefit. They were, they still voted down the budget. So what else do? You cut the budget, right? In order to, so that, it didn't quite work as we had all hoped it would.
Yeah. And I would just echo, that is precisely why the commission exists, because everything kind of came to a head in the last budget season, and that happened as well as many other things. And so, yes, you're exactly right. We didn't really talk about the sort of the problem statement part of this, and that is, that is part of it. I'm just going to review really quickly where we are, and then if anyone has a comment that isn't kind of related to the 3 prompts. We know we want to continue these opportunities, and in fact, we want to refine them. We want to make them more accessible, like we have. Really appreciate those of you on the screen. It is imperfect at best, to have a hybrid session. So we want to have some sessions that are purely virtual. And as I said earlier, we are in the process of moving forward a contract so that we have some expertise helping us with that. We want to gather information in other ways that don't, for people who can't come, whether it's virtual or not. We'll end up refining our work plan. We will deliver this report in whatever status we are able to make it. And then we have to turn our attention to all of this complexity that you just talked about, all of this data analysis that we have not had a chance to do yet. That's our work. So we're going to have to reshape how we're going to approach that. That last bullet, we're almost here. And just so you know that we wanted to keep our slide deck consistent. Cost containment recommendations, that's what the law asks us to do. Part of what we've been wrestling with is the fact that we're not sure that this timeline allows us to actually make cost containment recommendations. But the language is written that way because that's what it is in the law. So that's our work. We'll deliver a report mid-month. And then starting in January, we have 12 months to work on this report. So I'd open it back up just in case there's something that someone wanted to share that wasn't really related to those two prompts, and I'll show the screen in case there's someone up there. Yeah, go ahead.
My hope is.
Sorry. Nope, I was being very generic with my pointers.
My hope, and I have to express this at the board level, is that these public information sessions, that they reach much further down than they currently do. We hear all the time from the doctors and the lawyers and the small business owners and the professors, but we never hear from the English language learning families or the poor families or the unhoused families. And those are hard to get to. What do they want from their education system and their kids? And I think that their voice is something that we should be desperately seeking, rather than just the people that are well connected and wealthy who are in this room, myself included. I worry that their voice is being left out of this.
So I think it's important to respond to that because it's an excellent point, and it's part of why we've put out the bid, a request for the services of a consultant, is specifically to focus on engaging with the public in as equitable as a manner as we can, and particularly looking to reach out to marginalized communities that otherwise, for a variety of reasons, don't always turn out for things like this.
Well, first I just wanted to thank you all for coming. I've been reading about this all in the news for the past year, and to put it, in real life here in our little high school is a wonderful opportunity. So I want to thank you for coming and hearing us, and everybody here. I was able to really hear some of your thoughts and your perspectives, and it's helpful to put it into context for myself. And so two things are kind of standing out just as follow-ups. One was to Steve's request to find some data about the financial impact. And I guess the follow-up question to that is, if that's possible, what about the impact on students, right? Because that's the other side of the coin, is if you're saving money, then we fear that students' education will be negatively impacted. And that's what we want to weigh. So that's one piece of it. And then for your equity focus, the one piece, I think we can agree on the criteria for student equity-ish. I think that student, the per pupil spending equity, I think is a concern. And I think it's a concern statewide still, and I think it's a concern with newly consolidated districts. And that's just something, I'm not sure if you're looking at that, but I think that causes some tension with community members that are in the same district paying the exact-ish amount of money, but their per pupil spending in their school versus the other school may be many thousands of dollars different. And so just something to think about with the equity question.
there's no other thoughts, I would echo the thanks that several of you have shared. Thank you for hosting us twice for a long meeting and then for this session. Thanks to those of you who tuned in on the screen and came here this evening. And we'll continue our work and not just likely, we will have more opportunities that are more targeted, give you a chance. I mean, we hope to make these sessions iterative so that they start to be able to respond to things that start to come out of the commission. And we sort of recognize that we've been very myopically focused on this report, and not just because we were told to, but because the credibility of the commission is impacted by whether or not we can deliver something of substance. That's really hard to not rush it, and also to produce something that doesn't say nothing. Because if it says nothing, then this body won't be respected. And I can't remember who acknowledged that this body has the potential to be really impactful, but we need to deliver. So it's that's a really tricky needle to thread. So we appreciate your being here at this stage and hope you'll come back at our other stages.
Thank you. Thank you. Sort of an interesting conversation. Wow. Oh, yeah. Really good conversation.